the government will spend billions of dollars on software and it buys that software off a Microsoft Word document and not out of some type of technical demonstration.
And what drew me to it was the excitement of being on the cutting edge of technology, like you mentioned, but also being able to play in the public sector space and do good for all of humanity. Because what we were looking at from a technology perspective wasn't just for the public sector, it was for the commercial use cases that are out there. And so we built it inside, and they told me when I joined that it was going to be like 6 to 9 months before we spun out. I didn't know our CEO well enough at the time, but as I know him now, we spun out 4 months later and spent 4 months in stealth mode, and then officially launched in March of 22. And it's been a wild ride because emerging tech is one of those things that people are really interested in, but they have no idea what it is or how to buy it. And so over the last year and a half, it's been an education process in what the technology really is, what's available today versus what's available in 20 years from now, and who the real players are, and also informing what our adversaries are doing, because there's a lot going on in the emerging tech world that people aren't necessarily aware of.
There's so many different directions we can go there. All right, so we're gonna go procurement first, right? Because I think that is a resounding sort of battle cry from emerging tech companies all over. Like I was just in London having the same conversation on like the perils of procurement and how much of a pain in the ass it is to try to get anything into government. Again, I'll go back to sort of your unique being at senior levels, sort of inside the government, running sort of programs and being outside. You know, when you guys lay down that sort of annual plan and you're thinking through, how are you thinking about procurement? How are you thinking about, you know, maybe finding your hacks on how to take some of the, either the cost or the time or the friction out of the system? And how should folks who are listening maybe try to take some and apply some of that to how they're planning?
Yes. So for a commercial company that's trying to work in the public sector space, the death of all contracting is labor categories and labor rates. If you are not a services company, you shouldn't be playing in that field. And what you really need to think about is how do you provide a package, like a quick start package that enables the government to choose one of those that has your labor categories and how much time you're going to give them and your licensing fees and all of the stuff that goes into what you deliver into a quick start, so that you don't have to do separate licensing and separate labor categories and separate integration costs and all of these other things that the government doesn't know how to really do on an individual basis. Because typically they've done a services-based contract where they hire a traditional government contractor who comes in and builds everything from scratch, and they pay for it all, and it now becomes all of their IP, and it's all under government purpose rights, when in reality, commercial stuff is commercial stuff. So the IP belongs to the company, but that doesn't mean that they're any less passionate about providing capabilities to the government.
So you're talking about sort of almost making a unique CLIN that's got a bundle of some of the services that may be required to do some customer design or do user research or do integration, but also bundles that sort of license and ideally that sort of like LSA, legal protections in there.
Yeah.
To ensure IP protection. Nice.
Yeah. But I'll go one further than a CLIN. I'm actually going to call it a SKU. Create a SKU that you just scan the barcode that has all of it together for you.
Someone on my team is definitely laughing now because every time we talk about pricing or sales, like swipe the credit card on the website. That's the goal.
Right.
Just
exactly.
Boom.
It
Make
makes
it that
easy. It makes it
Yes.
easier. And then you don't have to have all these negotiations
Correct.
about, oh, that person cost me $1 more than I want to pay.
When you think about going back, I mean, that type of a mindset is AWS dropped like EC2 and it was pennies on the dollar and an individual could literally say, hey, I'm going to go grab a primitive, spin it up, swipe a credit card and go. And you're making it that easy. You're just taking for your buyer, for your customer, you're making it that easy.
That's right.
And then in exchange, you're also making it easier for you because that cost of sales starts to go down because you're able to just point them through and then you can start to get to repetition and scale.
Right. And it still goes with a typical licensing model. The more licenses they buy, the cost goes down. But you still need that initial quick start. If you're going to another part of an organization where you need to do some integration costs or look at their network or their architecture, that's something you still need to investigate and be able to cover costs for, but not gouge the government on.
All right, so you talk about sort of procurement, the act of buying, the scanning of the SKU. How do you guys think about, or how should the audience be thinking about sort of awareness and marketing and a mix, right? They're separate, but they're mutually sort of reinforcing, broader sort of evangelism, understanding the problem you're solving or the challenge, the magnitude of, and then also sort of the education, like, what is the solution? How does it work? Who is the right, or what's the right use case for it? How do you guys think about that?
Yeah, so I think in emerging tech, there's a lot of people who say they do something, but they actually really don't do it. Zero trust, for example, is one of those that comes to mind, where there's a lot of people in the zero trust realm that don't really understand what zero trust really is, and they're using the buzzword to get money from the government because there's so much money behind it. So the first thing that the government needs to do is really understand the technology that they're trying to acquire. And I think as companies, we need to take it upon ourselves to educate first. Not sell, we need to educate, because it does for the entire market. It helps. It helps for us to be able to scale. It helps for us to be able to provide real solutions, and it helps the government to make smart choices. And then once the government understands it, then you can talk about how your capabilities actually answer those technological needs.
So how do you separate yourself? Recognizing, right, there is a lot of smoke and mirrors. There is the rise of sort of the broader government outreach to the private sector has absolutely created some different cottage industries. There's folks who've written great articles, pretty data-driven ones on like where large amounts of cyber dollars are going. How do you separate from some of that, especially when you're around something like quantum that is like generally very poorly understood and a high degree of variance on that understanding across the community? Not only the specific sort of technical and scientific community, but also that procurement analyst or contracting officer who's trying to read 5 different proposals or white papers and understand which one and why, and are these the same or not? How do you separate yourself and prove that, hey, not only are we real, but this is appropriate. You should take a risk or take a flyer on us.
Yeah, there's a couple ways to do this. One thing that I think we need to do is we need to share more openly about the technology that we're working through. And that's something that we do at Sandbox. Is we have videos on YouTube. We are at conferences that aren't just government conferences. We're presenting globally about the technology that is of interest to the U.S. government. The second thing is to talk openly about where we're operating in the commercial space and the types of customers that we're operating with, and then the circumstances under which we're operating. For example, if we've gone head to head against other major competitors and we can openly talk about that, we'll talk about that with the government so that they know that we had a head to head competition at this bank, and now this bank has chosen us over them because of this. It helps with credibility and also accountability, because they can now talk to those customers and say, hey, what really happened? And then the last thing I would say is that we need to be able to demonstrate our capabilities openly to the US government and not just have a PowerPoint presentation, but actually a real live demonstration. And it may be in a demo environment because we can't operate and show client data and customer data, but to show what we can do is really important for all of those things I mentioned.
Yeah, I think that last point has been a hope of many of us for years, on just the fact that the government will spend billions of dollars on software and it buys that software off a Microsoft Word document and not out of some type of technical demonstration.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I will say is that they will buy something based on the promise of a delivery of a capability that's being built from scratch rather than a capability that already exists.
Oh, yeah.